On one of those cold winter nights, when the frost bit the skin so sharply that the air felt like ice rather than life itself, Marina returned home late. She always came home late from work, but this time something felt off. She felt an unsettling sense of growing anxiety fill her heart as she opened the door to her apartment. It wasn't just exhaustion, it was something else, heavy, pressing on her chest, making her nervous for no apparent reason. Her apartment was in perfect order, as always, but in one of the windows, through which she usually liked to gaze at the city, stood a strange figure. It didn't move and was blurry, as if it weren't even there. But Marina felt cold sweat appear on her forehead. The feeling that she wasn't alone in the room suddenly became unbearable. She couldn't understand why, but the figure, the shadow, seemed to be watching her. With each passing second, Marina stepped closer, and then she noticed, the figure wasn't outside, but inside, as if someone were standing behind the window, and the window was nothing more than a cursed illusion. Her heart pounded in her chest, and in that moment, the figure took a step forward, exactly as she did. But here's what was the strangest part, she realized that she, too, was moving in sync with the shadow, and each step felt like her own reflection. In panic, Marina grabbed her phone and tried to call the police. But as soon as she dialed the number, her gaze fell back on the window, where now there was no one, no shadow, no figure. Only emptiness. But when she looked at her screen, she saw a text message from an unknown number, "You're not alone here." Marina dropped her phone in terror. Her breathing became erratic, and the room seemed to swallow the light, darkening as if the world around her had suddenly disappeared, leaving her alone with this ominous silence. She slowly stepped back, trying not to make a sound, but the feeling of an alien presence grew stronger. Then she heard it, a faint rustling from the corridor behind her, as though someone was cautiously moving across the floor, brushing against the walls. It seemed the sound was getting closer. Marina tried to regain control and run out of the apartment, but the door, which always opened easily, seemed to have become fused with the frame, refusing to budge. Suddenly, all the windows were covered in frost, and the same word appeared on each one, written with trembling lines, as if someone were drawing it with a finger on the frozen glass. "Look. Look where?" Marina whispered, struggling to hold back tears. Her voice echoed in the empty apartment. And then a voice sounded. Low, husky, it whispered from the depths of the corridor. "In the mirror, Marina. You know what's hidden there. Look, or I'll show you myself." A wave of terror gripped her. The only mirror in the apartment was in the bathroom, but the thought of going there paralyzed her body, as if she were bound by invisible chains. The longer she hesitated, the louder the whisper grew, now coming from everywhere, drowning out even the beat of her own heart. Marina gathered all her will and slowly headed toward the bathroom. Each step was difficult, as if every cell in her body screamed for her to stop. She felt something watching her from the corners, from behind the doors, from the shadows. Finally, she stood before the mirror. It was covered in a thin layer of steam, though the bathroom was cold, like a freezer. She raised a trembling hand and wiped the frost from the surface. At first, there was nothing in the mirror except her own reflection, but then her eyes widened. Behind her, in the darkness of the corridor, a figure appeared. Tall, elongated, with a face that had no features. Marina turned around, but no one was behind her. "Look closer," the voice came from the mirror, but this time it was not a whisper, it was a rough, menacing command. Before she could do anything, the reflection in the mirror began to move, on its own. It turned toward Marina, as if it had become a separate being, and reached out a hand toward the glass. Suddenly, darkness poured out from the mirror, engulfing her. The last thing Marina heard before vanishing into the thick gloom was her own scream, echoed in the endless void. The next morning, a neighbor, deciding to check on Marina, found the door open and the apartment empty. All that remained of Marina was a message on the bathroom mirror: "She took me." Here's the translation. Several weeks passed, and no one had found Marina. The police had forgotten about the case, and the neighbors had returned to their usual routines. But strange things began happening in the city. People living near Marina's apartment started noticing that their homes were becoming increasingly sinister. The lights in the hallways wouldn't turn off, even when no one had entered, and shadows appeared in the windows that they couldn't explain. One night, a neighbor from the floor above, Alexei, decided to check his apartment when he felt a strange, icy atmosphere seeping through his home. He opened the door and saw that all the windows were covered in frost, and on the mirrors and glass, just like in Marina's apartment, appeared a message, written in faint lines: "Look down." Unable to resist the ominous call, Alexei slowly lowered his gaze. On the floor, in the corner of the living room, lay an old, battered diary. Its pages were open, and on the last one, it read, "You won't leave if you don't do what I ask." Alexei felt a cold shiver run down his spine, and the hairs on the back of his neck stood on end. He picked up the diary and noticed that the last lines on the pages weren't written with a pen, but with something hard, like claws. "Look in the mirror," the shadow whispered, appearing behind him. "You must look there. Or I'll take you, just like I took her." At that moment, Alexei realized that the mirror in his apartment was not just a piece of furniture. It was a portal. A portal to a world from which no one returns. He rushed to the door, trying to escape, but suddenly his gaze caught one of the mirrors. He froze, unable to tear his eyes away. In the reflection, which now moved independently of him, he saw himself, but with a distorted face, enormous black eyes, from which dark liquid was dripping. "You'll stay here, Alexei." The voice wasn't his, but he felt it deep within his consciousness. "You will be my new master." The mirror began to consume him, like a swirling vortex, and before Alexei could even scream, his body disappeared, leaving only the empty, shimmering glass. A few days later, someone noticed again, on the old mirror in Marina's apartment appeared another, far more terrifying message: "He stayed. Now he waits."